What if, in the course of a single day, one weapon, one technological leap, could redraw borders, rewrite doctrine, and force the entire world to confront a new, uncertain reality in Eastern Europe? History is full of moments when a single innovation changes the fate of nations, and October 13, 2025, may well be remembered as one such turning point. On that day, all eyes turned to the front lines near the war-torn city of Donetsk. Reports began to break with alarming speed. Russian forces had unveiled their latest artillery breakthrough, the Coalition Sierra Victor, or Coalition SV self-propelled artillery system. This was no incremental improvement, no routine movement of hardware. It was a leap forward that sent shockwaves through military circles, much as the introduction of the tank had done during the First World War, or the arrival of the atomic bomb had done in the mid-20th century. In the capitals of the West, the response was immediate, but tense. Behind closed doors, policymakers and military planners scrambled to digest the implications. For years, Western defense strategies had rested on certain assumptions about the limits of Russian artillery, the reach of their firepower, and the predictability of their moves. The Coalition SV threatened to unravel those assumptions in a single stroke, forcing everyone, from generals in Brussels to presidents in Washington, to ask, could this one weapon tip the balance of the conflict? Could it force new borders and upend decades of European security architecture? Why does this moment matter so profoundly? Because the margin for error is vanishingly thin. Just as the invention of the longbow at the Battle of Agincourt in the 15th century changed the nature of medieval warfare, or the use of blitzkrieg tactics in the Second World War upended traditional defense lines, the Coalition SV holds the power to render old plans obsolete overnight. A miscalculation now could mean not just the loss of territory, but the collapse of credibility, alliances, and influence far beyond Ukraine's borders. The stakes are no longer abstract. They are existential. Is this the spark that could ignite a more dangerous, more unpredictable chapter in this already grinding war? Or is it the catalyst that forces the world to find new solutions before the old ones are swept away entirely? To answer these questions, let's break down exactly what happened, why the deployment of the Coalition Sierra Victor sent tension soaring, and what it could mean for all players in this high-stakes confrontation. To do so, we must look back at moments in history when military innovation changed not just tactics, but entire eras. The arrival of the Coalition SV on October 13, 2025, was not just an incremental change. It was a paradigm shift, reminiscent of when the British first fielded the dreadnought battleship in the early 20th century, making all previous warships instantly obsolete. The Coalition SV's capabilities, extraordinary range, rapid rate of fire, and pinpoint precision, were unlike anything previously seen on this battlefield. With a reach extending up to 70 or even 80 kilometers, it could strike targets once believed to be far beyond danger. This was not a mere show of force. Within hours of its appearance, advanced Coalition SV units were spotted near Avdiivka and Krasnohorivka, two of the hottest flashpoints in the entire eastern Ukrainian theater. Eyewitnesses described convoys moving under the cover of darkness, obscured by camouflage nets and electronic jamming. Russian reconnaissance drones hovered overhead, mapping every detail, while electronic warfare vehicles jammed enemy communications, making intelligence gathering by Ukrainian and Western observers nearly impossible. Crucially, the artillery did not operate in isolation. It was deployed as part of a comprehensive offensive package: counter-battery teams to hunt enemy guns, electronic warfare units to blind and disrupt, and armored tank groups to exploit any breakthroughs. This approach, combining multiple domains of warfare, echoes the integrated tactics seen during Operation Desert Storm in the early 1990s, when the U.S.-led coalition's synchronized use of air power, armor, and precision munitions overwhelmed Iraqi defenses. The psychological impact was just as devastating as the physical. For Ukrainian commanders, the mere presence of the Coalition SV meant that command posts, ammunition depots, and infrastructure, previously safe in the rear, were now under direct threat. A single misjudgment about where to hide, where to resupply, or where to regroup could spell disaster. For frontline troops, every movement, every resupply run, suddenly carried mortal risk. This is why such breakthroughs matter. They do not just make war more lethal, they force every participant to rethink basic assumptions. The introduction of machine guns and barbed wire in the First World War forced armies to abandon massed infantry charges. The arrival of the coalition SV could force Ukraine, and by extension its Western backers, to abandon static defenses, centralized supply points, and predictable lines of communication. Satellite images, intercepted radio chatter, and snippets of social media all painted a picture of escalating crisis long before anyone in authority confirmed the news. The world's intelligence agencies raced to interpret these signals, just as they did when the Soviet Union deployed SS-20 missiles in Europe during the Cold War, prompting a NATO response that shaped decades of policy. Once again, the sudden deployment of a new weapon was a warning. The rules had just changed, and the old plans might no longer be enough. On the ground, Ukrainian commanders faced a new reality. The first salvos from the coalition SV would not just test their fortifications, they would force them to redefine the very concept of the front line. When your adversary can strike from twice as far as you can, hiding is no longer a viable defense. The psychological toll on soldiers and commanders alike is immense, as every shelter, depot, and headquarters becomes a potential target. Within hours of the coalition SV's debut, reports began to surface of massive explosions at key rail hubs used to funnel Western aid into Ukraine. Though official confirmation was slow in coming, eyewitnesses described shockwaves that rattled windows kilometers away. These were not random bombardments. They were targeted strikes aimed at severing Ukraine's lifelines and testing the resolve of its Western allies. The parallels to past conflicts are striking. During the Vietnam War, for example, the U.S. targeted the Ho Chi Minh Trail in an effort to cut off supplies to North Vietnamese forces, understanding that logistics are often the true heart of any war effort. The consequences of these strikes went far beyond twisted metal and shattered concrete. For soldiers at the front, the realization dawned that nowhere was safe. Not the rear, not the supply lines, not the command posts. For Western backers, every broken supply route was more than a logistical challenge. It was a blow to credibility, a public test of whether promises of support could be kept under fire. At the same time, Moscow's official response was measured but unmistakably assertive. Russian leaders invoked national security and the need to defend their interests, projecting a newfound confidence. Their message was clear. Russia now possessed the capability to shape the battlefield at will, and it would decide when and where to use it. This echoes the confidence shown by the United States during the early years of its nuclear monopoly, when mere possession of a game-changing weapon altered diplomatic calculations around the world. In Western capitals, condemnation was swift and public. Leaders from NATO and the European Union issued statements of unity and resolve. Yet, behind the scenes, hesitation was growing. Every option, sending more advanced weaponry, revising strategies, or taking concrete countermeasures, was debated fiercely and delayed by political calculation, logistical hurdles, and fears of escalation. The chorus of unity was loud, but meaningful action was slow to materialize. This is a pattern seen throughout history, whether during the early days of the Korean conflict or the slow Western response to the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Uncertainty was palpable. In quiet conversations, some in Western policy circles asked, "Is this the red line? Are we truly prepared to escalate, or will this simply become another milestone in a grinding war of attrition?" Each question exposed nerves, doubts, and the fear that the West might be outpaced by Russia's latest move. The stakes were rising rapidly. The reach of the coalition SV could force Ukrainian retreats from positions previously considered secure. It could undermine Western deterrence and shake the pillars of European security architecture built over decades since the end of the Second World War. The once unthinkable, a decisive shift in power across the continent, now seemed not only possible, but imminent. Yet, what if this is only the opening act? What if the world is about to be blindsided again by a new phase of escalation, one that no one has prepared for? As Ukrainian and Western leaders struggled to chart their next moves, fear and uncertainty rippled through every capital. Every analyst, every strategist, every citizen watching the news understood. The war's trajectory was hanging in the balance, and the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic. The deployment of the coalition SV near Donetsk had changed the equation overnight. The threat was no longer theoretical. Moscow now held in its hands a tool that could redraw maps, or ignite a wider conflagration that might draw in NATO and reshape the entire order of Europe. For Ukraine, the calculus was now brutally simple. Commanders had to rapidly rethink their entire approach to defense. Old systems of static trenches, centralized logistics, and clustered units now felt dangerously exposed. Their immediate hope was to secure longer-range weapons from Western partners. Without them, every position became more vulnerable by the hour. The psychological battle was as fierce as the physical one. The specter of deep, precise artillery strikes haunted every Ukrainian unit. No rear area was safe, and that knowledge undermined morale, sowed anxiety, and threatened to trigger premature retreats from critical ground. This mirrors the effect that German V-1 and V-2 rocket attacks had on London during the Second World War, where the psychological impact often exceeded the physical damage. Western military aid, vital for Ukraine's ongoing resistance, now hung in the balance. Supply depots, railways, and roads that once lay comfortably behind the front were now within range of Russian fire. Every shipment was a gamble. Every delay risked disaster. In previous conflicts, such as the siege of Leningrad during the Second World War, the ability to keep supply lines open determined the fate of entire cities and armies. Now, the fate of Ukraine's military effort depended on adapting to this new reality. This technological leap was not just a tactical shift. It threatened to escalate the entire conflict. Ukraine would likely intensify its pleas for high-precision, long-range systems, or even resort to sabotage and covert action deep behind enemy lines. The boundaries between conventional and unconventional warfare blurred, pushing both sides into unfamiliar territory, a scenario reminiscent of the escalation spiral seen in the Afghan-Soviet War, where each side's innovations forced the other to adapt or risk defeat. For policymakers in Washington, London, Berlin, and Paris, the stakes had risen sharply. Should they surge support, risking broader escalation and direct exposure to Russian retaliation? Or should they lean toward negotiations, wary of stumbling into a confrontation that could draw NATO directly in? Allied unity and resolve, so often tested in the past, were about to be tested again by the unforgiving logic of new battlefield realities. Traditional doctrines, crafted in an era of more predictable threats, now risked irrelevance. Military leaders, diplomats, and strategists raced to decipher and counter a threat that was evolving faster than their old playbooks could keep up. The cost of failure to adapt would be catastrophic: lost territory, shattered deterrence, and a potential domino effect that could unravel European security. For Russia, the gamble was equally high. Deploying advanced systems like the coalition SV stretched their own command and supply lines, exposed new vulnerabilities, and dared rivals to strike back, just as the deployment of Soviet SS-20 missiles in the late 1970s prompted NATO's deployment of Pershing missiles, leading to a dangerous arms race. Every leap in capability risked overreach, retaliation, and escalation on unpredictable fronts. What lessons can be drawn before events outrun everyone's grasp? What decisive steps must be taken while choices remain? First, both sides must review historical precedents. The armies that survived the shocks of new weapons, whether British soldiers at the Somme adjusting to machine guns, or Israeli forces during the Yom Kippur War adapting to anti-tank missiles, were those that innovated quickly and refused to cling to obsolete tactics. Ukraine and its allies must embrace rapid adaptation, dispersing forces, decentralizing command, and making supply chains mobile, unpredictable, and resilient. Second, intelligence sharing and seamless coordination are now non-negotiable. In the Gulf War, the U.S.-led coalition's ability to integrate real-time intelligence allowed it to destroy Iraqi command centers and logistics with unprecedented speed. Ukraine must replicate this level of integration, leveraging Western surveillance, satellite data, and drone reconnaissance to anticipate Russian strikes and preemptively relocate assets. Third, morale and communication are as important as hardware. The British maintained public morale during the Blitz through transparent communication, realistic expectations, and visible leadership. Ukrainian leaders must foster a similar spirit. Clear, honest briefings, visible adaptation, and resolute refusal to be intimidated by technological surprises. For Western governments, this is a moment of reckoning. Symbolic meetings and token shipments will not suffice. Only credible, concrete aid, delivered urgently and tailored to new battlefield realities, can restore deterrence and preserve alliances. The U.S. Lend-Lease program during the Second World War is a historical example of how sustained, meaningful support can tip the balance in a protracted conflict. At the same time, Western planners must be ready for escalation. The deployment of the Coalition SV is a test, not just of military capability, but of political will. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, a measured but resolute response, backed by clear communication and readiness to escalate, was essential to averting disaster. Today, a similar balance of resolve and restraint is required. For Russia, the risks are equally profound. Rushing advanced systems to the field exposes weak points, strains logistics, and invites countermeasures. History is full of examples where the side that innovated first, like Germany with the V-2 rockets, ultimately found its technological edge eroded by determined opposition and relentless adaptation. Observers must remember that modern conflict is a cycle of technology, adaptation, and surprise. The fate of nations belongs to those who learn fastest and act with purpose. Miss the moment when the balance tips, and catching up may already be impossible. The Maginot Line, once considered impregnable, was rendered obsolete overnight by German innovation in 1940. Today's static defenses may be tomorrow's ruins. This is the crossroads. As the dust settles over Donetsk, decisions made in these tense hours will echo for years, shaping the security of Europe, the credibility of alliances, and the very order of the world. But while the world watches Donetsk, the ripple effects of this leap in technology are already spreading. Each new move, whether aid packages, new deployments, or covert operations, could trigger consequences no one expects, recalibrating the conflict in unpredictable ways. Tomorrow's wars are shaped today, by those who refuse to be surprised by the future. The lessons of history are clear. When a single weapon or innovation changes the game, the side that adapts first seizes the initiative, and sometimes the future itself. When Russia unveiled its Coalition SV artillery near Donetsk on October 13, 2025, it was more than breaking news. It was a warning shot across the bows of every nation invested in the outcome. In a world where one technological leap can upend years of planning, no nation, no alliance, can afford complacency. For years, generals, policymakers, and citizens alike have relied on familiar threats and steady timelines. Now, the emergence of game-changing weapons means that yesterday's strategies, yesterday's assumptions, can be rendered obsolete overnight. The West and Ukraine must confront not only the possibility of losing ground, but also the risk of losing credibility, alliances, and influence on the global stage. For Russia, the rewards of dominance are matched by the dangers of isolation and backlash. Complacency is not just dangerous, it is fatal. Being unprepared does not only risk territory or failed operations. It can erode freedom, fracture alliances, and threaten the stability of entire continents. Every moment spent denying new realities gives adversaries a critical advantage. This is a call to action. Leaders and citizens must ask themselves, how do we prepare for wars where the next breakthrough is always just beyond sight? How do we adapt when every old certainty could fail overnight? Most importantly, how do we defend not just our borders, but the principles and partnerships that underpin our societies. Because the world is watching, not simply to see who wins the next battle, but to see who can adapt, who can predict, and who dares to confront the unexpected before it arrives. History will remember those who refuse to be caught off guard, and those who shape the future rather than being swept away by it.